welcome to Furthermore with Amanda Head. You're seeing me, not just hearing me. That means that we have launched our new series. Today starts our Small Business Saturdays. As many of you know who already listen to my podcast Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that is audio only, I have a heart for shopping small business. Also love small businesses that have values that align with mine. I think that it's important to support people in their business ventures who are on the conservative side of things, or, maybe even not totally down the line on the right side of things, on the right side of the aisle, but people who, a lot of times these are issues where people, or instances where people from the left have said, okay, stuff has gone way too crazy for me, and I'm finding myself politically homeless, even though I've had kind of these conservative feelings for a long time. And we're going to have a lot of people like that on this Saturday series as well. But I am so excited for my very first guest. She is Jennifer Sey. Many of you know her from her career as a world champion gymnast. But she is also, she left a very cushy job at Levi's during the COVID pandemic because she saw all of the garbage that was happening with kids in schools mainly. That was her main impetus, but just all of the COVID madness. And she is now one of the staunchest and most courageous allies for women and protecting women in sports. So she launched her new clothing brand, xx-xy, that we're going to be talking to her about. Just yesterday, she launched a special new performance line with xx-xy, and we're going to talk all about that. But for those of you who listen to my regular podcast, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, these Saturdays are going to be video. Hello, you obviously can tell that that's the case, but you can watch this across all of my social media platforms at Amanda Head. The podcast also has its very own X profile at Furthermore Pod. And then, of course, on YouTube and Rumble, you can watch these Small Business Saturday editions. So we're going to take a very quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with Jennifer Sey. Welcome to Furthermore with Amanda Head. You might notice that you're actually seeing something as opposed to my regular podcast where you're just listening. That is because we are doing Small Business Saturdays here at Furthermore, and I am so excited to highlight some small businesses, and I am thrilled to jump off with Jennifer Sey, who some of you have seen her on our TV show. She is a force to be reckoned with. She's out here. I think she's still out here in California with me. We're kind of the last of the Mohicans. Oh, you've left. All right. So she shook her head. She bailed out, and I get it. And truth be told, I might have to talk to her after the show to figure out how she actually escaped. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Nice to see you again.
Great to see you. And I imagine most of my audience knows who you are. They're familiar with you. They've probably even read your book and follow your athletic wear line. But if you could just give everybody kind of a brief synopsis of who you are, where you've been, where you are now, and just a bit of your story.
Yeah, you got it. I'm going to sort of do the quick version, but my life in phases. So as a child, this is very relevant. I was an elite gymnast. I was a national team member for 7 years and the 1986 national champion. Very proud of all of that, but it was a very difficult experience at the end of the day. There's a lot of abuse in the sport, emotional, physical, and yes, sexual abuse is rampant in the sport, unfortunately, which we now know because of the Larry Nassar scandal, the team doctor who went to prison for life. And after leaving the sport, despite my successes, I felt quite defeated and, pretty much like a loser, unfortunately. Imagine being the national champion and walking away and feeling like a failure. And I continued to struggle with that for many years, 2 decades. And I ended up writing my first book called Chalked Up in 2008. And it was the first person account of the abuse in the sport. It was my first cancellation. You were not allowed to talk about it. The gymnasts came for me, the community came for me, the USOC came for me, everybody. And that was a pretty brutal experience. But you know what? It strengthened my resolve because I realized if they're kind of pushing back this hard on the true things I'm saying, there's more there. So, that's informed a lot of my advocacy, I think, since then. Simultaneously, I had developed quite a career as an executive. I started at Levi's in 1999, worked my way up the ladder, became an award-winning chief marketing officer, and ultimately the brand president. I made a film called Athlete A in 2020, a documentary which really mobilized the gymnastics and athletic community to stand up for themselves and to say, we're not going to take this abusive coaching anymore. So I'm really proud of that. Unfortunately, that moment of redemption for me, right at that same time is when COVID hit. Mm-hmm. And I was very outspoken from the get-go about the restrictions to children, closed public schools, masking of toddlers, and closed playgrounds. And that was my second cancellation. And that was a lot more intense than the first one, because that was really kind of the entire world was going through this crazy upheaval. And eventually, during that time, I chose to resign from Levi Strauss and walk away so that I could continue my own advocacy and focus on the projects that I wanted to focus on. And after 23 years of a very successful career there, I felt like, okay, it's time to move on and do what I want to do. So I wrote a book. And I'm making a film called Generation COVID, which is about the harms to children. And now I started my own brand called xx-xyathletics.
I love it so much. And I guess let's focus on the COVID aspect first.
Yeah.
And what you have coming out with regards to COVID, because, I'm not a parent yet, but practically everyone that we were friends with are parents. And I think they realized it during COVID, but definitely now. And I have friends who are teachers as well, maybe not necessarily have their own kids, but they have 30 kids under their purview.
Sure.
And the devastating effects on their education, kids in 8th grade who can't read, kids in 10th grade who can't perform, simple mathematic functions. It's been devastating. And I don't think we've seen that with any generation. It's got to be COVID.
Oh, it's absolutely COVID. The long tail effects of close to 2 years of school closures. And it makes me nuts, Amanda, when people say, oh, schools were closed a couple months. No, they weren't. In my home state at the time, California, I have moved to Colorado since then. The schools were closed for close to 20 months. And I think, Zoom school was not school. Kids were not logging in. They were not doing the work. They were getting passed anyway. They weren't learning. They weren't sort of being socialized and developing those skills. So you have kids who were in middle school who never developed that kind of social maturity to be able to handle high school. Yeah. And chronic absenteeism right now is more than double what it was before COVID. And, my personal opinion on that, which I think is quite valid and has been proven out with many studies, is we sent a very strong signal to children that they came last in our priorities, in our societal priorities. Think about it. Everything was open before the schools were. Strip clubs that people could go out, stand shoulder to shoulder at the bar, dancing. They were open. Large stadiums with 60,000 people in them watching football games, watching the Super Bowl, open. And yet our schools were continuously disrupted. What does that say?
I mean, Anthony Fauci at baseball games without a mask on.
What does that say about our priorities? Yeah. It says, kids, you're the least important among us. Suck it up and deal. You need to take one for the team. You need to take one for, the octogenarians. And you need to just deal. And you know what? If you complain and if you really suffer and struggle, you're a bad person.
That's right.
Think about how a child, an adolescent, would internalize that. And think about the fact we sent the signal to them that school just isn't that important. It doesn't really rank in our priorities. And so are we surprised they haven't gone back in record numbers? This is on top of the catastrophic learning loss, the catastrophic mental health impacts, drug use and deaths of despair and, all of it. It's just, and the real criminal thing, Amanda, is that the most vulnerable children were harmed the most.
Yes.
The poorest children, the low-income children, because these are the kids who were left home alone, possibly no Wi-Fi, certainly no adult to help them manage the complexity of online schooling. And they didn't do it.
Of course not.
I mean, look, I worked at home for 2 years. It's really impossible to sit on Zoom. I mean, I could do it for like an hour or two, and then it just sort of started driving me crazy. So a kid is not doing it. And, in the film I'm making, we talk to countless families, and the kids were just, watching Netflix on one hand. They were, texting their friends on the other. They didn't have their camera on. They weren't doing school. And even outside of these very vulnerable populations, these children who were potentially very young and left home alone, no child was spared from the isolation. Think about your time in high school. This is when you're individuating from your parents. You're out there with your friends. You're maybe getting in a little trouble. You're doing naughty things. That's all part of it. That's about kind of bridging that transition from adolescence to young adulthood. Yeah. And they were stuck home in their room with their parents. It's just, I don't know how people don't see it, that this was, really, really catastrophic and caused by these closures, and that we really basically put children last. And in my opinion, children should come first. We should never ask children to sacrifice for adults or the elderly. It's like the natural order is all kind of topsy-turvy when we do that.
Yeah. And then you compound the issues of them not being at school, not learning, not having supervision, not having someone to structure a schedule for them. There's a vacuum created. And as we know, for so many kids, what fills that vacuum is social media. And so these kids were on TikTok and Instagram and all of these different social media platforms, filling their heads with garbage, nothing that would be anywhere near conducive to an education. And I think that that has actually fueled what we are seeing now, something that shockingly Bill Maher spoke to on his TV show about what appears to be the trendiness of kids not being just straight kids, and I mean straight in the sense of not gay. It seems that I think social media has had a huge influence on that, but it seems trendy. And I want to bring that into the conversation because that was another
girls in
COVID.
Particular.
Yeah.
I mean, kids were basically stranded online, or, there are a few kids in our film who, they were sneaking out, they were getting together with friends. They were getting into all sorts of trouble. These were not productive activities.
Right.
As one mother in the film explained it so well, school is more than an education. It's structure. Yes. It's where you get positive feedback. It's where, maybe you're having a bad day, but you see a teacher in the hall and they provide some words of encouragement. Yeah. So it's this very positive framework, and it's community. Think about when you were young, school was everything.
Yep.
I mean, for me, it was sort of tangential because of gymnastics, but for most kids, it's really everything. It's your entire social system. And even for kids that aren't into academics, they want to be there for the social interaction, perhaps the clubs, perhaps the sports. Kids couldn't play sports either. And so they're not getting any validation. Well, kids need that, and they will seek it then in less positive ways. And that is what was happening during this time. But girls in particular were very online. And, if you are struggling and you are troubled and you are perhaps depressed from the isolation, you are anxious, you're being told you're a terrible person because you're depressed, like what an endless cycle of shame and negativity. And you're correct. Many young girls found solace in this sort of gender ideology, which is very rampant on the internet in certain purviews. Tumblr, apparently, which I've never been on, is one of the big places for this. And, it offers you this solution that is a very kind of step 1, step 2, step 3. Are you feeling depressed? Are you feeling uncomfortable in your body, which is very natural during puberty? Well, you are possibly trans, and then you are possibly the opposite sex, and then you get all sorts of affirmation and positive feedback, and clapping virtually for your decision then. And this was especially true for children who had other difficulties. Autistic children, for instance, or children on the spectrum were particularly vulnerable to this ideology. And we've just seen, as Abigail Schreier has written about this, like, I don't even know the number. I mean, it's like 1,000-fold increase in young girls thinking that they are boys and then taking the actual steps to transition. And it's interesting because within European countries at this point, they're rolling all of the medical treatments back. And in
That's
fact,
right.
they've just outlawed in the UK, quote unquote, gender affirming care puberty blockers for minors, because they've concluded after a very robust review called the Cass review by a notable pediatrician that there's no evidence that this relieves any of the distress, because the distress is coming from someplace else.
Right.
So,
right.
you know, what we need for these kids is to be much less online, to be with friends in real life, possibly, you know, doing a little bit mischievous things, but things that kind of promote independence, adulthood, independent thinking. And that's not what they're doing. They're still incredibly online. And what's very disturbing to me about the school situation is it is now a tool in the toolbox that we could close schools for any reason. And if you sort of observe the headlines of late, you'll see that schools close for all kinds of reasons. They close for, you know, climate change when it's hot. They close for the eclipse. They close for migrants that need to be housed in particular high school in New York. Like, what?
Yeah.
We could just close schools whenever we feel like it now. And here's the really, sorry, one last thing that really just gets my goat and really set me on fire during COVID is the private schools were open.
Right.
And so what I really am confounded by is how people did not see that hypocrisy and become outraged. Because the well-to-do kids were in school starting in August 2020. They were also competing in sports. So they were able to vie for those college scholarships when the vulnerable, poor kids were not, because their sports were shut down for 1 to 2 years, depending. So they weren't recruited. So the kids who didn't need the scholarship got the scholarship.
Right. And the kids who did couldn't.
How is the left okay with this? I will never understand it. I will never understand how that sort of glaring hypocrisy wasn't enough to kind of light everybody up in the way it lit me up.
Yeah, no, I get it. And, you know, when I think about what you were saying, I mean, philosophically, the notion that our country is deprioritizing kids and their education. And Jennifer, I think about, you know, people like you, people who have excelled in the STEM areas, you know, astronauts, researchers, people who have found cures for all of these diseases, world leaders. We as Americans stand on the shoulders of giants, and we are unfortunately breeding generations of kids who aren't going to be giants. Whose shoulders are we going to stand on?
Oh my gosh, the list goes on of all the ways that what you're saying is going to be made, you know, sort of manifest reality. We have pulled back on the standards in schools. You know, in San Francisco, where I used to live, one of the things that really sort of started to motivate and mobilize parents was they made it, you could no longer, if you were in 8th grade, if you were a math student, you could no longer take algebra. In the name of equity, they were sort of removing algebra from 8th grade. Of course, the private school kids, again, were still doing it, but it was like, let's lower the standards so everybody is equal. And, you know, that prevents a child then from being able to take calculus by senior year and be on an advanced math track in college. So now they're reversing this because they've realized it did nothing to create the sort of quote unquote equity they wanted to create. There's a very special school in San Francisco called Lowell, which is a public academic magnet school for very advanced students, and you had to test to get in and all of this. And it's been the pride of San Francisco for many years. Very, very bright kids who perhaps just don't have the means. A lot of immigrant kids have graduated from the school, incredibly accomplished people, well-known Supreme Court justices have gone to Lowell. During COVID, they decided that was racist to have these academic standards to get into this school. And so they removed that and they just said, well, anybody can get in, so we can diversify the school. Well, now half the kids are failing at Lowell because they haven't sort of changed the academic standards. So now they're going to reverse that again. But it's like, we don't need to lower the standards. We need to raise the expectations for everyone.
Absolutely.
And, you know, in a sense, with the most vulnerable children, you want to raise the expectations even more so they can strive to, you know, overcome their circumstances. And yet we have this culture of victimhood that says, your life has been too hard. We are going to lower the standards. And that is not a recipe for pulling yourself out of a
No.
difficult situation. And it's just, and guess who's not doing this? China.
Right. Yeah. And the devastating thing about what you were just saying is that that mentality that we're going to lower the standards for you, that endures for posterity. As far as like for the rest of their life, there won't be a mindset that if I strive, I can get beyond this. The mindset will forever be, I'm just going to do what I've been doing, and the system will cater to me. And
yeah, and
that doesn't breed success.
Well, it doesn't breed grit, perseverance. It's like, you know what? Your life was too hard. You get to just not do anything. And
right.
It's okay because you've been a victim. It is true. Some people have more difficult circumstances.
Absolutely.
That is absolutely true. Some people have a tougher hill to climb, but we should believe that they are capable of doing that and help them to do that. And we've just given up, and we've sort of given them this sort of excuse to opt out. The whole thing is just crazy. I don't even know what else to say about it, but I think we need to continue to we need to start to prioritize our children, all of our children, including the most vulnerable with the least resources. And we need to set high standards, and we need to teach them grit and resilience. And it's one of the reasons I love sports, because sports really do teach you that grit and resilience. And for all the troubles I had in sports, I learned that if I can't do it the first time, if I keep working really hard, I will master it. If I fail and I dust myself off and I pick myself up, I can actually be successful. You know, I broke my femur at the World Championships in '85. Everybody thought I was down for the count. 9 months later, I came back and won nationals. If that doesn't teach you grit and resilience, nothing else does. And in a sense, I feel like the left, my former kind of cohort, they hate sports because they are truly meritocratic.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And then you get into the conversation about meritocracy in sports, and then you consider a league like the NBA or the WNBA that is predominantly Black. And then you have to get into the conversation with liberals about, well, if tennis is racist because it's mostly white people, then why isn't basketball racist because it's mostly Black people? And it's because it is a meritocracy. And that's when the conversation ends, or the argument ends, rather, because they have to kind of face up to it.
Well, and I mean, the best female tennis player of all time is Black. The best female gymnast of all time is Black. The top 3 gymnasts in the country right now are all Black. So, but ironically, you know, we watch at this point what's happening with Caitlin Clark, who is an absolute star and bringing such great attention to women's basketball and the WNBA, attention they've been wanting since their inception and have not gotten. And it's because she's really fun to watch. I don't even like basketball, and I think she's incredibly fun to watch in the same way that Steph Curry is fun to watch, because she makes these like outrageous 3-pointers. And yet, look at the criticism she's facing.
And the bullying.
Ugh,
so gross.
I mean, there was that piece written that was, I can't remember who wrote it, or maybe it was a tweet, I can't remember. You know, the only reason Caitlin Clark is getting all this attention is because of white, pretty privilege.
Pretty privilege, yeah. Ridiculous.
Did
you see Charles Barkley's remarks, though?
No, what did he say?
Charles Barkley was like,
the best.
Y'all are petty. He was talking about all the women in the league. He's like, she brought you guys private jets. She brought you more eyeballs. She's probably going to end up raising the salary for everybody. Y'all are petty. It was quite funny. Speaking of graduates, I went to Auburn, and he went to Auburn as well. But one of the gymnasts who I have my eyes on right now, and I'm interested if you know about her, Suni Lee, is competing in the Olympic, or I guess she'll go to the Olympic trials, but she's an Auburn grad as well. So it's
interesting. I didn't realize she was. Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah.
Is she a world champion, Olympic champion?
She won gold last time
at the Olympics because Simone had dropped out. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. That's
she's had a very difficult life and challenging experiences in her life.
Yeah.
And she's overcoming.
Absolutely.
Yeah. She's outstanding.
Okay. So I want to go back to, actually, you know what? I think we have to take a very quick commercial break.
You got it.
We're going to be right back with Jennifer.
You did it really well, but let me just show you. If you can do your hands like this and get them flat on the ground, then you can use them to push. Good job. Even closer. Title IX was passed in 1972, which was really a watershed moment for women. And a forward roll down. The chance to play on a team in high school and all the development, emotional, physical, educational development that provides. Scholarships at the college level. Without women's sports, you don't have those educational opportunities. Title IX did that. My name is Jennifer Sey. I am the founder of xx-xyathletics. I was an elite gymnast, 7-time national team member, 1986 national champion. The athletes that get to the highest level, what they have sacrificed, the amount of work they've put in, it's really kind of unfathomable. To get to that level and then be thrown into totally unfair circumstances of having to compete against a biological male, it's hard for people to understand how devastating that would be.
My name is Riley Gaines. I swam at the University of Kentucky.
My name is Paula Scanlon, and I was a swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania.
I started when I was 4. I graduated college when I was 22, so I spent at least 18 years of my life dedicated to becoming the best that I could be.
I started swimming at age 8. It was really my outlet. I learned how to be a member of a team. I learned how to work hard at something and achieve.
The sacrifices and the time and the hours that you put in, it's immeasurable. Midway through my senior season, this name pops out of nowhere. Leah Thomas was actually formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's team.
The athletics department told us that Leah being on this team was a non-negotiable. They told us that if we continue to object, we should seek psychological services.
The 200 freestyle, which is the event that Thomas and I raced in, we had tied down to the 100th of a second. And the official says, "Great job, you two, but you tied. And we only have one trophy, so we're gonna give the trophy to Leah. Sorry, Riley, you don't get one." We've been advised that when photos are being taken, it's crucial that the trophy is in Leah's hands.
And the school also told us not to speak to the media. They told us we'll regret it. They said this will follow you for the rest of your life and you will never be able to get a job. This is an issue that's happening in front of everyone's eyes and no one is speaking about it.
If we were to eliminate gender categories in sports, which I believe is the inevitable outcome of this ideology, women lose all of the educational opportunities, the developmental opportunities, the opportunity to compete and play and win. They lose all of that. It's a real tragedy. We fought for a long time to have access. These governing bodies, they don't want to lose the sponsorship dollars. They don't want to get dragged by the activists. And so they sacrifice girls and women in the process. All of these brands, athletic brands in particular, stand up and celebrate women on Women's History Month and International Women's Day, and not one of these brands has stood up for women on this particular issue. Brands are tools of culture. They further ideas, and culture undeniably informs the way we collectively think about things. If we're successful and the product is amazing and people want to wear it, I think it can really be a part of changing the conversation. We're going to make it cool for women to stand up and say, no, not my space, not my sports.
Everybody, welcome back to this special Small Business Saturday edition of Furthermore with Amanda Head. I am here with Jennifer Sey, someone who has had such a sharp view on so much that has happened since COVID. And Jennifer, I just have to applaud you for having the courage to speak out about this, because I look at what's happening, particularly with women in sports and what they are experiencing. And you've been one of the loudest voices advocating for those women. I want to get into that, but I want to go back to something that we were talking about before the commercial break when you brought up Tumblr. I had someone on my podcast who wrote a book, and she compiled stories of dozens of people who are either parents of or who are the people who transitioned. And she talked about a number of different apps, but Tumblr was the main one that was kind of the originator of transing people. And exactly what you were talking about, these people would be on the app and they would be, kind of bummed out about their life and possibly experiencing some type of depression and anxiety. And these people would pounce And they would be like, oh, well, if it was a guy, you should grow out your hair and, you should, throw on some lipstick and you should act more effeminate. I think this happened exactly with Chloe Cole.
Yeah.
She was experiencing the same thing. And then she transitioned. She started going through that process. And just what you said, they started applauding her. It's this constant feedback system that's literally driving this machine.
Yeah. I mean, kids in that age, you need validation. Like I said, the positive affirmation comes ideally in school. Unfortunately for me, I was spending all my time in the gym, which was not positive affirmation.
Right.
It was all based on sort of negativity and bullying.
Yeah.
And, beyond the physical abuse of training on broken bones. And I think that's why I struggled so much as I came out of the sport. That said, Chloe Cole is one of our brand ambassadors at xx-xyathletics. I know we'll get to that because I think she's just she's so brave. And the real, this is a young woman from California. She is on the autism spectrum. She was struggling, depressed. She found this community online, was convinced that, she was actually, in fact, a boy. She started that transition process at a very young age. Her parents, told she would commit suicide if she did not, by the doctors involved in her care, of course, loved their child and, were trusting these experts and wanted to be helpful and supportive. I cannot imagine the guilt parents are going through who have had to deal with this. And this, she was started on puberty blockers, and she was actually given a double mastectomy, so surgically transitioned at, I think, 16.
Yeah.
I mean, what a tragedy. And then, of course, a couple years in, and I cannot imagine the strength of character to do this, she realized that was not her problem. She was not, in fact, a boy. She was a girl.
Yeah.
And she detransitioned, and the community at that point completely abandons you.
Of course.
And they start to trash you. And can you imagine at her age, she's only 19 years old, standing up to that?
The fortitude, I can't imagine. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, she's an incredibly strong person. And you're also dealing with the loss, and you're feeling dumb and duped that you did this to yourself, in a sense, and the guilt the parents must feel. And she is just out there as an activist speaking truth, and she's on a mission to ensure this does not happen to any other young people. I just commend her. I think she's so strong. And we just were so enthralled with her story that we did ask her to be an ambassador, because at the end of the day, the brand, we are the only brand that is standing up for the protection of women's sports and female athletes and women's spaces. But ultimately, we're about celebrating brave people who speak the truth in a world of lies, which is very difficult. And I started on this, I came to this idea on this brand in a conversation with a friend who does work on the business now. And it just was like this light bulb moment. What else could I do right now at this point in my life? It was sort of the culmination of having been an elite athlete, having been a fashion and business executive that was very successful, working for one of the most beloved brands in the world, and being kind of comfortable with saying unpopular but true things. I mean, I don't think you can get canceled a third time, can you? Like, you're sort of bulletproof at that point.
I think so. Absolutely.
But I will say the intensity of pushback on this particular issue, it's pretty intense. I'll just say that. And now, so was COVID. I mean, that was, the whole world went mad. And so if you even asked a question about, are we sure this is the right idea? You were just kind of demonized and vilified as a murderer by your friends and family. So this rivals COVID as far as the intensity of zealots.
And similar to COVID, very, very far reaching and long lasting repercussions. And it's, I don't know I hope that there's an about face. Jennifer, do you think at some point we will reach a point where?
I do. Okay. I do. I think it's going to take a very long time. I think similar to COVID, it's also endorsed by the medical community. So it has this sort of like halo of the experts saying, and similar to COVID, Europe is doing it differently. Europe opened the schools. This sort of bastion of left wing, these are socialist countries in some cases. they observed the harms being done to children as early as April 2020 and started to open the schools, like in Denmark, et cetera. And Sweden, as we know, never closed the primary schools. So I don't know what it is. And, now we see, like I said, a reversal in many European countries, Northern European countries in particular, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, the UK are all going, there's no evidence that this is actually helpful to young people. We need to, and, first do no harm is our credo, and we are doing tons of harm. So we need to really take a pause. And the US, with the issuance of this Cass report, has just doubled down because it's an activist-driven medical community.
Yeah.
Not science-driven.
No.
Activist-driven.
Right. I think Europe was following the science. They were taking evidence and data and using that to create policy. We were told to just trust the science. We didn't know what the science was. And now we know from Anthony Fauci's own mouth on that hearing earlier this week that there wasn't any science. The whole 6-foot rule was just an arbitrary figure. 3 feet, that doesn't look good enough. Let's do 6 feet. That these are our scientists.
And 6 feet is the reason schools were closed as long as they were, because you couldn't have 30 kids in a classroom with 6 feet of distance. That's why it matters. Yep. And it was made up. Yep. He said it. It was completely, he said, I don't know, it just appeared.
He said it just appeared. Yep. Just sort of appeared.
And yet he hid under the guise of science. In fact, we know he famously said, I am the science.
That's right. So gross.
Oh, I'm so tired of experts. I don't want any experts anymore. I just want to be left alone. I want, reduced impact and influence and power in places like the CDC and public health more broadly, because they've done nothing but try to tell us how to live, who we can see, what we can do.
Yep.
I'm done.
Yeah. I've moved more in the direction of natural products, especially with respect to skincare. And one of those products is tallow. And I saw an article flash up the other day that was like, board certified dermatologists warn against using tallow. And I'm like, this is something that has been used for literally millennia, since the time of Cleopatra, and it takes money away from your industry. So obviously you're going to poo-poo it. But anytime I see anything that says board certified, clinically tested, blah, 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 I'm just like, that means nothing to me anymore.
No. None of it. I don't want to listen to any of it. My pet peeves, which people laugh at me about, is we don't need to drink all that water. The whole however many ounces a day. Yeah. I've never drank that much water in my life, and I'm fine. Yes. And you may disagree with this, but I think the whole sunscreen thing is a scam. I don't think we need sunscreen. And in fact,
I'm moving in that direction, by the way. So I don't think
we're all vitamin D deficient.
Yes.
That's why.
Yep. Yep. And why is it that there are more instances of skin cancer, particularly melanoma, since sunscreen became mainstream? Anyway, we're getting off on a tangent, and I want to make sure I focus on xx-xyathletics, because this podcast is coming out on Saturday. So yesterday, Friday, you came out with a performance line. How did you start this clothing line?
Well, like I said, I had this sort of, I'd been interviewing for, a couple years or a year and a half at large companies. I need to go back to work. And I just had a really negative experience in doing that. And, I have 30 years of experience, my reputation, my achievements speak for themselves. And I was kind of challenged on some of my advocacy, and I was kind of asked to apologize in some of these interviews. I was asked if I regretted my actions. And it was clear that if I sort of had agreed to bend a knee and follow the script going forward, I might be able to secure, a really cushy CEO job at a very large company. And I just wasn't willing to do it. I'm in my mid-50s. No, I am going to be myself. I'm going to say what I think. And I just realized that would not be possible in a large corporate structure. So despite the fact I never wanted to be a founder or CEO, that's where I found myself, and had this idea with my friend, Brett Craig, and we decided to start this thing together. So we launched on March 25th with really sort of casual clothing, cotton t-shirts, et cetera. This is one I'll show. This is one of our funnier t-shirts. Just say it, just for fun.
I love it.
And we had sweats and t-shirts, and the response was just like phenomenal. Yeah. And this Friday, what's the date? June 7th, we are launching our performance, or we launched by the time this airs, our performance products. So that's all the workout gear you want. That's leggings, that's bike shorts, that's moisture wicking fabrics.
Oh, yes.
We have obsessed over fit and fabric. These are the softest leggings you're ever going to wear. They are incredibly flattering. I've worn every brand. We wear tested them ourselves. I think what I want to make clear is this is not a gimmick. I'm not in this to sort of just kind of sell a bunch of product for a year to capitalize on this issue and get out. I want to make world-class product, and I want to be the only brand that actually stands up for women, because all these brands out there pretend to stand up for women and not one of them actually does. So we're going to put our money where our mouth is. I'm putting my personal money where my mouth is. And I think there's an audience out there. Look, 70% of Americans agree with you and me that women's sports should be for women.
Yeah.
That includes a lot of Democrats, let's be clear. And I will tell you, every kind of sideline conversation I've had with soccer moms, they're like, I agree with you. But they're, no
Say
matter
it louder.
what,
Stop whispering.
There you go, girl. That's our goal, is say it louder, stop whispering, wear the t-shirt, have the hard conversation, because you'll be surprised. Most people agree with you. And when we stand together, we can't lose. But what I think the right and conservatives and even sort of just centrists have failed at is influencing culture. They've focused on politics, but politics are downstream from culture. And I think brands have the opportunity, if they do it well, to inform culture. And so if we can make it cool to stand up and say, women's sports and spaces need to be female. That's not bigotry. But we women have fought too hard and too long, and we are not going to sit down and be quiet. We're not going to have our kindness weaponized against us. We're going to stand up for ourselves. Because let's face it, it's men who are telling us to sit down and be quiet. And I'm not doing it.
No,
I'm not doing it. So we're just hoping we can start a movement, essentially.
Well, I'm going to hop online this weekend and buy some of the performance gear. I'm a big fan of leggings. I do try to work out relatively regularly, but I just wear leggings all the time anyway, because when I'm on air, all you see is my top half. So the bottom half, like anything goes. But I am so excited to try this out. Everybody, please go check out her line. It's xx-xyathletics, and please go buy her book. It's Levi's Unbuttoned. It's an incredible book. Jennifer, I read it last year. I guess that was last year when we had you on the show, and your story is just incredible. Your resilience, your tenacity, your courage. It is amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, that is so kind. I'm so grateful that you've had me on so many times, and it's great to know you, and it's great to have your support. And go check out the brand. You're gonna love the leggings, I promise. There's none better in the market. I wear every brand. I wear these are the best.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait. Everybody go check it out, xx-xyathletics, and go buy her book. Jennifer, anytime you want to come on, if you have a new product launch or something, you're always welcome here. Thank you so much.
That's so kind. Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a very quick commercial break. I'm going to wrap up with a few more thoughts at the end of this. So we're going to take a break and we'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back. Wasn't that an incredible conversation? Jennifer, a little bit of backstory on her and how I know about her. She came on the TV show that I co-host with John Solomon, Just the News, No Noise. And it was shortly after she had released her book, Levi's Unbuttoned, which if you have not read that book, I encourage you to go out and get it. It is a much longer and detailed version of her story and her background in gymnastics. I remember one of the anecdotes she told me was about when she was competing globally and she went to Russia. One of the reasons that her job at Levi's meant so much to her at the time was because when she went to Russia, she found that one of the ways that she and her teammates could connect with other gymnasts, particularly in Russia, for whatever reason, I remember that fact sticking out. But she said that they would kind of barter with these ladies using Levi's jeans because at the time you couldn't get them in Russia. And so, that obviously led to her career at Levi's. And, you imagine her being one of these C-suite type people who is a hashtag boss girl and all of the things that go along with that. But the first time we had her on the TV show, I just remember the impression I had of her, which is that she is so down to earth And yet she is just absolutely courageous and speaks her mind. And I love that aspect about her. She's a mom. So she, like a lot of you out there who are parents, experienced so much at the hands of the federal government, at the hands of people who we thought were making wise decisions for us as Americans. People at the NIH, people at the NIAID, Anthony Fauci, who liberals still somehow worship. I don't get that, especially after Anthony Fauci's disastrous, actually, I wouldn't even call it disastrous, but his testimony the earlier part of this week. And the reason I don't call it disastrous is because I don't think that he really got any hard-hitting questions. And for those of you who listened to my podcast yesterday with Dr. Harvey Risch, you would know why they didn't ask or they weren't able to ask some hard-hitting questions. So make sure there's a little plug for my own podcast. Go check that out, because Dr. Harvey Risch is incredible, and he's one of the most measured, responsible, precise people in the scientific medical community that I think we've had on the show. And so it was an honor to have him on yesterday, and I encourage you to go check out that conversation because it was phenomenal. Anyhow, Jennifer experienced all of this garbage, all of this malarkey at the hands of the government, and she left that very lucrative, but also kind of special job for her. It was special because, as I just told you, the story about her competing in Russia and bringing Levi's with her, it just kind of tugs at your heartstrings to realize that she left that behind. But as you can tell, she is a woman on a mission. But in talking to her, it actually kind of brought back memories of the beginning of COVID, because so many of us, obviously at the outset of it, when we were all starting to hear stories about people getting COVID, I remember the first time I heard about someone actually getting COVID, and many of you probably remember this, it was after CPAC. And it was in February of that year, because I remember the next month in March was my birthday, and it was just a few days after that when things shut down. But after CPAC, I remember there was an announcement. Matt Schlapp came out and said, whoops, guys, so somebody tested positive for COVID. So I think back to that time when we were all a little unsure of what was actually happening, what the effects of COVID were going to be, how bad it was. Are people going to die? Can we get a vaccine? Is there anything that stops this? What can we do? And then many of us, I would imagine pretty much anybody watching this video, anyone who listens to my podcast, we caught on pretty early. We started getting those feelings that maybe things weren't exactly what they seemed to be. And Jennifer was that way as well. And I don't think it really took any special, like, heightened talent for intuition to realize that. It was just that, you know, you had Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx and all of these betters, these people out there trying to bark at us and give us instructions. And I remember when I first heard the 6-foot rule, I thought to myself, that just seems so arbitrary. And the masks, I immediately knew the mask thing was garbage, because I was talking to a doctor friend of mine who was talking about the actual size of a molecule. And I don't even remember the measurement. I guess it wouldn't have been micrograms, because that's mass. Anyway, whatever it was, the molecular size of it was such that it wouldn't pass through a mask. And so I remember that it would pass through a mask. The molecules were teeny, teeny, tiny, such that a mask was completely ineffective in stopping it. Unless you had an N95 that fit you absolutely perfectly, you don't have any facial hair, it fit all up under your nose, or all up over your nose and all around your jaw and snugly under your chin. And then we saw people wearing the fabric masks. Like, you could just drive to Joann or Michael's or Hobby Lobby and just grab a yard of fabric and cut it into 10 different pieces and hand it out to your friends with a rubber band, and that would suffice. And I still see people here in Los Angeles to this day, in June of 2024, people whose identity became COVID, and they are so bitterly clinging to it. And I have gotten to the point now, and I'm not proud to admit this. Maybe I am. Maybe I am a little. Anyway, these people need to be made to feel silly. So when I'm in the car and I drive past someone who is wearing a mask, I just roll down the window and I yell out, mask, 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 mask. I've gotten pretty good at it, and I've started rubbing off on other people because I have friends who I'm in the car with, and they do it too. And sometimes they'll catch it even before I do, and then I have to jump in. But my heart breaks for getting back to what Jennifer was talking about with respect to the trans issue and what we are seeing. For many of you, you tuned in for my audio podcast with Mary Margaret Olahan, who wrote the book where she compiled dozens upon dozens of stories of people who either transitioned themselves or had a family member or a child who did. And it has become trendy. I do believe that especially for middle to upper class white people, because they can't check off a box for Black or Latino, Pacific Islander, or poor, or gay, or whatever the case may be, that they have to push something like that on their child in order to fit in and in order to feel like they could be a part of the oppressed class. And I could be totally wrong. I could be totally misjudging their motives, but I don't think I am, to be completely honest. Anyhow, please, everybody, go find xx-xy online and purchase some of Jennifer's items. Please go purchase her book. Again, it is called Levi's Unbuttoned, and the website for xx-xy, you can find that online at, where is the website? xx-xyathletics.com. I am really excited to go buy some of her leggings. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in for this very first episode of Small Business Saturday, a part of my podcast, Furthermore, with Amanda Head. I will see you all, actually hear you all, on Monday. See you then.